I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum, and we are interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the United Kingdom. It's June the 18th, 2024, and we are online. And here today talking to John Leng. John, please, could you just tell me some basic information about yourself? Can you tell me your full name and your place and your year of birth?
John Leng is my full name. Um, I was born in Bromley, UK, 1934.
And tell me a little bit about your background, your upbringing. Who were your parents, and where did you go to school, and what did you do at school?
Oh, okay. Um, well, uh, we were living in close to Biggin Hill Airport during the start of the Battle of Britain, and so my father moved us out to the west of England, and our family sort of got distributed to different relatives in different places, and so was in Cornwall for most of the war. And after the war, uh, followed my mother back to Ilfracombe, where she got a job. And so I went to grammar school in Ilfracombe from the fourth grade on. Um, and I got my school certificate there. Um, Took a civil service exam for one of the national labs in the country for a 5-year student apprenticeship, and got my first choice of Harwell Atomic Energy Research Establishment, and went there for 5 years. Studied at Oxford Technology, Art and Commerce College, got high national certificates in electrical and mechanical engineering, and became an engineer at Harwell in the electronics division. And
Okay, so before we go too far down that route, just tell me a little bit about what did your folks do? What did your parents do? Were they working? Were they studying? What did they do?
well, my parents got split up in the war. My father was in construction and shipbuilding. Um, my mother became a seamstress and uh, got a job wherever she could, down in Cornwall and then back in Ilfracombe.
Okay.
And we tend to follow her around with her work. And so um, not a lot of family get together in the war years or thereafter.
And were you evacuated to Ilfracombe? Is that correct?
No, we evacuated down to Cornwall, Devon first actually. Um, uh, in Devon, place called Hatherley near Oakhampton. We were there. We were living under the kindness of strangers. We um, found a cottage that was uninhabitable. So a farmer put us up for a number of weeks until we could get this cottage habitable. We had two families in there, 2 rooms up, 2 rooms down, no plumbing, no electricity. So it was a sort of a primitive existence. Anyway, we were there for a number of years of the war, and then uh, we followed my mother down into Cornwall, where she was doing work.
And what
So I started at Helston Grammar School, and was there for a few years. And then uh, when my mother went to Ilfracombe, I followed her there and went to the Ilfracombe Grammar School, uh, which was a savior for me. They were very caring, Um, Half of them were Welsh teachers. Uh, Very fond memories of them.
Why was it a savior for you? Were they great teachers? Did you do well academically?
They were good teachers. They were caring, um, and I did reasonably well academically. Um, um, I failed at French, so in those days, um, you couldn't go into university without French. Nowadays, I think the rule is you can't graduate from university without a foreign language. So anyway, I took that civil service exam and got that 5 year student apprenticeship at Horwell, uh, which essentially got me my professional engineering um, qualifications for the Institute of Electrical and Mechanical Engineers.
And did you have any subjects you particularly enjoyed at school? Were you sort of into engineering science subjects or
Yeah,
anything like that?
basically that was my biggest interest.
Mm.
Science, geography, maybe.
So you went to school and you're interested in science and grammar, so science and geography. So then how did the apprenticeship at Harwell open up? Tell me a little bit about that.
How did the repeat the
The
question, please?
apprenticeship. So you took the civil service
Okay.
apprenticeship, didn't you? And that led on to
Yes.
Harwell.
Well, yes. The government had a civil service exam, um, which provided for 100 places around the country in the various scientific labs and ordnance factories for 5 year student apprenticeships. If you had your university entrance qualifications, you do university study and then part time doing your apprenticeship. If you, as in my case, uh, I did 5 years at Harwell, and I would do 2 days at Oxford Tech and 3 nights and 3 days working my apprenticeship at Harwell.
Were you? It must have been an interesting field because what was Harwell like at that point? What work was it doing?
Well, it was. I mean, it was on the leading edge of the nuclear industry, basic research. Um, it did a little weapons work in support of Oldham Austin. Are you still there?
Yep, still here. Yeah.
Still a little work in the support of Oldham Austin, the weapons, but it was mainly commercial research, and it was a big establishment. And of course, today it's a big high tech community that with many companies working at the Harwell site.
Am I correct? Did you say that you had been lined up, or your mum had wanted you to work in a newspaper or work in or journalism in some kind, or you that's where you'd been looking at?
Sorry, you'll have to repeat
Talking
that.
about what your mother wanted.
Had your mum wanted you to join a newspaper to work or something before this?
My mother?
Yeah, I believe you said she'd want you to join the news to work for a newspaper or to work in publishing of some kind.
No, I don't. No,
Oh, it's post office, John. Your mother had interviewed for you at the post office.
oh, yes, yes, interesting. Um, um, I'm getting an assistant
Okay.
here from my wife. Um, yes,
There you go.
but I guess I was in the sixth form, and my mother was a little concerned that I hadn't got a job. So she went, uh, she applied for a job for me with the post office telephones. She took the interview and got the job. The headmaster of my school and the manager of the newspaper company, I can't remember who they're called now. Uh, one of the bookstores in town in Norfolk, decided that I should go there as a management trainee. And in the meantime, I had taken a civil service exam. So I had all these people trying to get me employed. Fortunately, I found my own route.
Yeah, they were taking a great interest in your future, weren't they?
But where indeed.
What? So you end up at Harwell. What's it like? You said it was on the cutting edge of the nuclear industry at the time. Well, how does it feel to be there? And what What were you working on at that particular time?
Well, the apprenticeships, like first year, you spent in the workshops, learning all the machine tools and so on. And then there were two groups of apprentices. Those that were going to be craftsmen, machinists, and those that were going to be engineers or scientists. And I was in that second group. And so after the first year of the machine shop training, we'd do 3 to 6 months different assignments around the various labs on the site. And I ended up finally in the electronics division, and I was really interested in that aspect of it, and so that really captured my attention, and where I went from there.
Now, at this point, are computers a fact even in your working life? Are computers starting to appear at this point at Harwell?
Well, at, at that point, Ken Dyer, who was one of the branch managers, and Puck Yarborough, who was the head of the electronics division, had produced a computer which I think today is at Bletchley. I'm not certain. I think it's been moved to Bletchley. And it was made with Decatron tubes and relays and so on, and quite a successful machine. So we were doing a lot of things in the lab there with Decatrons and relays, computer-related devices, and so on for logging data from experiments and controlling experiments and so on. So it was basically very good training for me. And I met at that time a Canadian girl who had transferred from Chalk River in Canada, and she was heading back to Canada, and I decided I would like to go there too. So I got transferred to Chalk River, the Chalk River Nuclear Laboratories. And
I was going to say, what is Chalk River? Is a nuclear laboratory, yeah?
they were the main nuclear labs in Canada, and it's where the actually some of the bomb people moved for the development of Britain's first nuclear bomb. And in those days, we had a tripartite agreement between the UK, the United States, and Canada. And so the scientists and engineers were moving around. So it was easy in those days to migrate from one lab to the other, which I did.
And what is Chalk River like? Is it in a town? Is it a rural kind of place?
Well, it's out in the wilderness, about 120 miles northwest of Ottawa, on the Ottawa River, big river, the Ottawa River. River was about 2 miles wide there, so it's a big river. Joins the St. Lawrence in Montreal. Anyway, it was that lab started in Montreal. The Montreal lab's part of the nuclear bomb program, and then moved out to Chalk River. And the work that was going on when I was there was mainly aimed at commercial power generation. So they developed the first reactors that were going to be used for nuclear power in Ontario.
Now, wasn't this where you got your first experience at did DEC? It was the PDP-1, was that correct?
Yes, yes. Um,
Tell,
Up until that time, of course, it had been all specialized electronics, and I made a trip down to MIT and discovered the work they were doing there, and they introduced me to DEC, who had just produced the PDB-1, an 18-bit computer, and I could see that could carry out pretty well everything I'd been doing with specialized hardware, and plus this program could do more things and do analysis as well. And so I ended up buying a PDB-1, and it probably was the first one to provide real-time input at the same time as it was doing computation. So it was gathering data from the accelerators at that time in the physics division, and doing calculations at the same time. So
can you describe a PDP-1 for those people who haven't seen it? What does it actually look like? It's not like a computer what you'd imagine it today, is it? What does it look like?
well, it was in standard 19-inch cabinets, standard electronic cabinets in those days, and so it was just like a box of electronics, basically, with a lot of lights on the front that flashed, and and toggle switches, because you had to toggle in the thing called a rim loader, which was the basic program that enabled you to feed in paper tapes and other programs. And it was quite a fast machine. It was an 80-bit word length, and it was very popular at MIT. One of the first programs they had running on it was called Star Wars, and the students were very enamored with it.
And what was it's not the film, is it? What was Star Wars? It was a game of some kind, wasn't it?
At that point, I don't think there were any films or anything. It was I think they were the people that invented the concept of electronic Star Wars. Yeah.
So does it have things like a keyboard, or does it have a monitor? This PDP-1. How do I as a person interact with it?
Yes. It had toggles. It had a keyboard and toggle switches, so you could toggle in the basic loader, and it had a paper tape reader, and later on had small things called deck tapes, little full tape cartridges, and double recorders, very reliable, and so that was basically it. And over time, of course, it had other capabilities, all the standard peripherals that you put on a computer. But it was sold mostly for simulation work, data gathering in labs, and so on. And was very popular in the scientific labs and universities.
How did it? I mean, two questions for you. How did it change things? And how did it did it open your eyes in some way? Was it like a moment for you to use and see this machine?
Well, for me, the advantage was it could do all the things that I'd been doing with specialized hardware, and was programmable, so you could customize it for different applications. And after that first installation of Chalk River, then Digital developed a cheaper version called the PDB-4, and we use that for a reactor control application, and we wanted to be able to do data logging at the front end without interfering with the control applications of PDB-4, and so they designed a PDB-5 for us, which was a 12-bit computer, and was basically the first first mini computer as such. The PDB-5, they produced about 100 of them. When I left ACL and joined Digital, I took the PDB-5 over to Europe, to Harwell, various labs, on the continent to various labs, and demonstrated it. And there was quite a lot of interest. We sold it.
So tell me, how do you make that jump? How did you go from not working, from being a customer, a user, and working for the nuclear industry to suddenly them getting the job at DEC? What was the process, and why did you want to work for them?
Well, I had opportunities in different directions, of course, continuing at Chalk River. One of the scientists that I'd done a lot of work for, Al Bromley, moved to Yale to be professor of physics, and he wanted me to come there and help him. But I decided that I was hooked by computers at that time, and Digital heard that I was considering moving, and so they latched onto me and persuaded me to join DEC.
Why do you think? I'm curious. Why do you remember? Why did they approach you to join them?
Well, when in those days anyway, we were working very closely together. They were involved in what we were doing, and we were influencing their designs. And so, they knew what was going on and what we were thinking, and they knew that I was considering moving, and so they latched onto me, and I moved to Maynard, Massachusetts, where their headquarters were. Got some training there, and then helped get the Canadian company underway. and after my trip to Britain and Europe with the PDB-5, persuaded DEC that they needed to set up in Europe. There were so many opportunities. And their motto was, those that propose do. And but John, why don't you go do it? So that's what I did. And that's when I came to the UK in 1964, I think it was. Yeah.
So you joined the company, I think, in 1963. What was it like? It's still quite a small and it's quite a young company, isn't it?
Yes, working in the old woolen mill, a 1 million square foot old woolen, Civil War woolen mill in Massachusetts. The company were doing about 10 million in sales at that time. I was the 833rd employee. I still have my badge somewhere. That meant that there were about 400, because there's always turnover. So there were about 400 employees when I joined, doing about 10 million. When I left, I can't remember what year, 79 maybe, 78 or 79. I think they were doing
9.
I think they were doing 2.5 billion, something like that, and probably had 50,000 employees or something crazy like that.
So, and they sent you off to start up the Canadian subsidiary, I think you said. Is that correct at this point?
Yes, yes. There was only one person there, Denny Doyle, well-known individual in Canada, became the leader of the high-tech industry in Canada. So I joined him there. We worked together. He was, DEC had these logic modules that they sold. That was the first product they produced. And their financiers, American Research and Development, even though they know they could produce computers, didn't want them to, mostly just wanted them to sell these logic modules. And that's what Denny Doyle was doing when he started the Canadian operation. and then I came there and I got the computer business going in Canada.
Well, tell me, what are logic modules, and why did they switch from selling the bits and pieces to now selling the computers? Would you remember that moment, or did you witness
Well,
that?
they were computer designers and at MIT, and and um, these are the logic models they were using in the computers. So they had a standard set, uh, and that could perform all the functions and so on. And when they got their financing from American Research and Development Corporation, uh, that's what they started selling uh, to other labs and so on to build specialized computer products, the sort of things that I'd been building. And but they really wanted to be in the computer business. So,
And was there a moment, do you remember, when that they made that flip, or was there a management conversation that said we got to do this, guys? We'll go from selling the modules to making the computers.
well, they were determined to do that from the beginning, and they had designed the PDB-1, the PDB-2, and the PDB-3. The PDB-1 was the 18-bit computer, PDB-2 was 24-bit, the PDB-3 was 36 bits. They never produced the 2 and the 3, and General Dorio convinced them, just do the modules first, see how that goes, get your company underway, and then you can do the computers, which they did, of course, because they were computer designers. And after the PDB-1, they did the PDB-4 and the 5 and the 6, which is a 36 machine. Yeah. Which a mainframe, basically a big machine. Yeah.
So the market is picking up. There must be a huge amount of demand and enough for them to open a subsidiary in Canada. And then, so then you said here you took the PDP-5 to the UK and Europe to demonstrate it, hadn't you? That was the kind of the next step. You now work for DEC and you take the PDP-5 to UK and Europe. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
What was the reaction to people when they saw the PDP-5? Those customers. What can you remember? What their response was?
Um, well, those that were doing the same sort of things that Chalk River were doing were quite interested. At Harwell and the various labs around Europe, Saclay in France, and so on, and the various labs in Germany, CERN, another place, and but the PD5, I think, enamored them because it was an inexpensive machine. I think $18,000 at the time, quite inexpensive. And whereas the PDB-1, you'd be up around 100,000, so it was a different kettle of fish. Yeah. And the first computer that actually I sold in the UK was to Harwell, and it was a PDB-4. And doing similar work that we'd use the PDB-1 for at Chalk River. And subsequently, of course, we sold the machines there. But they were the first customer. And in fact, Ray Jones, I think was his name, was the customer. We ended up hiring him. He became a software manager for DEC in the UK. That happened a lot. As I was hired by the supplier, we tended to do that quite a lot.
Yeah, that seemed to come up a lot. Why? What was the logic for that? Why did that seem to be the DEC thing?
Well, for a start, they understood our products and were enamored by them, and didn't need a lot of training. And the other thing was they were fascinated with the product, so it was a chance for them. It was, um, it was a good career opportunity for many of them.
And it was a small market, wasn't it? I imagine they were quite as the market for computers was tiny at that point, and so the number of people who understood them was quite small. So there'd be quite an elite group of people, wouldn't they?
Yes, it was relatively small. Uh, I think worldwide we probably didn't sell more than 100 PDB-1s or 100 PDB-5s. I think what the uh, uh, the technology was changing, chip technology, and um, we were able to go from the PDB-5 to what was deemed the PDB-8 with the same architecture, uh, using uh, microprocessors and chips and so on, lower cost and higher speed, and greater reliability. And that machine was very successful.
Well,
Um, People were waiting for it.
we'll go back a little bit. So at some point, so there's a receptive market in the UK. It feels like you've made a PDP-4 sale to Harwell, and you'd already I think you'd taken the PDP-5 to UK in Europe. So what do you sense in the wind there in UK? What is it that makes you go to the manager and say we need to open a UK subsidiary next?
Well, because I had visited a number of the labs with the 5, and they were quite interested. Um, and there were a lot of labs throughout Europe and universities that had the ability to purchase these products and use them. So, and they were, they were familiar with what we had done in the US and Canada. And so, it was an interest.
Why was it kind of no longer sufficient to just sell it from the US? Why did you kind of have to be in the country to do that? Was there any benefit or advantage?
Well, um, basically, the customers want service, right? They want to know that when they buy the machine, it's going to be someone around to fix it when it doesn't work. They do require maintenance, and they needed software support. They needed training for their programmers and so on. And of course, they want to know you're going to be around when they need you. So you have to establish a presence. And so we started in the UK, and we'd already been selling memory test equipment uh, um, to Siemens in Germany, and so had a small office in Munich supporting them. But the first computer sales were started in the UK, and we spread from there.
And what did you say to them? Do you remember who did you pitch this to? Was it Ken, or who did you pitch this idea to?
To establish the subsidiary?
Yeah, to go to the UK.
Oh, yes, Ken, Arlen Anderson, the vice president, and the others in the product managers, yes. Yes. I got to know them pretty well by then, and I trusted them, they trusted me. Yeah. So they said, okay, John, put up or shut up.
It was remarkable considering you'd only joined them, what, a year or so before.
Yes, but I'd been a customer, so they knew me pretty well. I knew them, yeah. In those days, they were an extension of our engineering, and so we were pretty close, yeah.
So what happens next? You just get on a plane or arrive in the UK. How did you decide to come to Reading? There's a story here, isn't there? You almost went to Bracknell.
Yes, well, of course, I came across with my family. 3 children at the time, another one that was born shortly thereafter in the UK. And I think staying in a hotel, I think probably in Henley on the Thames somewhere, and looking around for where we're going to set up. That area was the sweet spot, so to speak, because I'd worked at Harwell, knew people and so on, and knew where the labs were and so on. So we got our first house, rented a house in Bracknell, and I started working out of my home there. I tried to open an office in Bracknell. It was known as a new town in those days. In the UK, they were setting up these new towns to move the populations out of the big cities. And so they were reluctant to allow foreign companies to come in. They wanted to keep it for British companies. And so I went down the road to Reading. And as I say, it was just a sweet spot. It was right in the middle geographically of where I wanted to be, and close to the airport. And so after standing out of my home in Bracknell for a while, found that little spot in Castle Street in Reading. The bill was the bingo hall. Inexpensive. Fitted in.
Why was that? Why was it important? I think you said it was important. It was inexpensive. They weren't particularly. They were
Yes.
rather frugal, weren't they?
They were
Deck, I
known
think
as a
you were kind of
pilgrim
suggesting.
company in New England. Quite frugal, very careful on expenses, which was very good. Um, and so nothing much.
What led you? What led you to the office on Church Street? Were you looking at different facilities, or did this kind of come up?
I
The only
don't
place that
remember.
came up.
I don't remember if I was a real estate agent, whether I saw the ads or what. I don't remember.
Mm.
But when I discovered it, I knew it was a good fit, and a nice big space, and in Reading, and inexpensive.
And so it was the bingo hall above the furniture shop in an old church, correct?
That's it. Yes, yes. And with a couple of pubs outside, that was a good spot.
Do you remember the
And
Do you remember the pubs' names?
no, I don't. It'll come to me probably sometime, but I don't.
And you were close to
remember.
the breweries, the brewery, I think, weren't you?
The brewery was behind us. Yes, and boy, when they were fermenting that beer, could you smell it? Anyway, we adjusted.
Did you find yourself going to the pub at lunchtimes?
Yes, oh, it's across the street. Yes, yes,
How was it?
very
That's not
much.
very much the Canadian or the American way of working, is it? How did you kind of find that kind of cultural shift? Yeah.
The pubs. Well, remember I was raised in the UK, so I was not averse to pub life.
Tell me a little bit. So it starts small. Now you were telling me that you had initially, of course, before you even got the office, you were making your first hire is a secretary, isn't it, Hillary Cheap? But before that, you had been making calls out of
Yeah.
phone boxes and telling telegrams to get customers.
Yes, yes. And my first sale to Harwell for the PDB-4, my quotation was via telegram. That's the only way I could get anything printed, and it was official. And you had to go on a waiting list to get a telephone in those days. And Bracknell was very tough, so we didn't have a telephone. And so I go to the phone box, and sometimes there'd be a little old lady inside, or someone, and you'd have to wait for them to finish their phone call, and then I'd go in, and of course I'd have a bunch of calls, and then they'd be lining up on the outside knocking for me to
Were you,
finish my call so they could make theirs. So it was a little primitive.
were you feeding? Must be feeding change into the phone to make the calls go.
I beg your pardon?
You must have been feeding coins into the phone to make it to keep these calls going.
Yes, yes, I suppose so. Yes, yes. And of course, we did that in Canada and the US too. When you're on the road traveling around, uh, you stopped at a petrol station, gas stations, where the public phone boxes were. You always had a supply of quarters, 25 cents, to make phone calls. And that was standard procedure for anyone in the sales business and traveling business. You're using public phone boxes.
So would you walk into the phone box with like a load of papers and taking notes in the phone box, a notepad and pen to keep record track of stuff, or how does it work?
I can't really remember. Uh, Basically, I was making cold calls to people in various locations and see if I could set up a meeting, come visit them, and so on. And uh, I obviously had to do my homework beforehand, have the numbers that I was going to call, and so on. I can't remember much about the details. Long time ago, 60 years.
Come on, it's as fresh as yesterday. Tell me. So at this point, you decide it's time to recruit, hire a secretary. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, yes. I was sadly in need of administrative help. You know,
So
and
how did who you hired? What was her name and how did the story? How did you come about hiring her?
well, I placed an ad in the Times. I don't know why the Times, but I placed an ad in the Times. Um, and I got this letter response from Hilary Cheek in South Wales. And she sent her resume. And I wanted to interview her. And I was a little embarrassed about interviewing a secretary in the bingo hall. And so I suggested that she come to the Randolph Hotel in Oxford. I knew it. I think I'd stayed there. It was a posh place and a good place to interview. And her husband decided that that was probably inappropriate, that they would come to the office. And they both turned up. And Malcolm was a school teacher, and I hired Hilary, and Malcolm became a school teacher in Reading.
And tell me a little about Hillary. What was she like? What was she was her her skills or abilities? Can you remember anything about her?
Um, well, um, right, uh, dedicated, uh, was not put off by little problems. Administratively, very good, and worked out very well. She was a jack of all trades in a way. I don't know if she was trained as an accountant or anything, but she initially did a lot of the paperwork and was very meticulous. And I was very lucky.
And she was employee number two, I think, wasn't she? So you were one, she was two.
Yes. Right.
And you,
Right. Right. I've lost track of her. I have no idea whether she's alive, she's got family or children or what. Really such a long time ago, and she stayed for a number of years. I can't remember why she left. Could have been involved in Malcolm's work. Perhaps he had to move. I don't know. Um, maybe she had a child. I can't remember. If you can track her down, you probably get some more interesting stories.
we'll do our best. We've been trying to, and it's a revelation to get the name from you as well, because we knew there was a second employee and it was a woman. We didn't know anything about her until we started
Yeah.
speaking to you.
I don't know if I have the spelling right. I don't know if there's an E on the end or not. I can't remember.
There is a public.
put in
We
the-
got a publication as well. I can't remember if you sent it to us from a DEC magazine that spells her name out as well. So there's even a picture of her.
Well, yes.
So, and you were producing. You didn't say you start at this point. You're now got a typewriter as well. Is it a Freedom Flexo writer?
Yes, yes. That was uh, how I got hold of that. I don't know, but what a gem it was. Um, 'Cause the quality of type was like an IBM typewriter. I had a paper tape input, and so we produced a standardized letter that we could send out when the PB5 was upgraded to the PB8. It really hit the sweet spot in the marketplace, and uh, by then I had a big potential list of customers, and we produced these letters on the Flexiwriter, introducing them to the PB8, and we had a brochure as well, and we to our whole mailing list we sent out um, this letter, and and um, the quality was very good. Of course, we're sending a number of them to Harwell. We must have spent 6 or 8 or 10 to different labs at Harwell, and they started comparing their letters and realized that it was a computer-generated letter, because they're all the same. The any uh, bad marks or anything like that were the same on every letter. So it generated a lot of interest. Anyway, uh, that set us off. We had a lot of response from the PBA, and
What I believe. Who do you remember your first customer at this point? I think
Harwell was one customer.
Hull was the first one, but I think you said there was a National Gas Turbine Laboratory as well. Was that was as a result of this?
KDB7, yes. Well, right, shortly thereafter, right. Yep.
So they took that. And are you starting to you're starting to recruit people now as well, aren't you? It's starting to grow a little more outside of you and just Hillary. Who are you starting to bring on board? Who are your first hires?
Well, Wally Spittle, who I knew from Harwell days, um, I knew he was pretty competent, hired him to be service manager. So he came on board, got trained, and but while he was being trained, we had support from the US and Canada. I think Jim Milton was the first one from Canada who came over. He'd worked on and installed the computers for DEC there, and had been at Chalkering. So he came on and installed the PB4 at Harwell. Wally got trained, and then he was installing PB8s, and then we were hiring other technicians as the business grew. And I hired 2 other people for the sales activities, sales and marketing. Jeff Finch, a Cambridge graduate, very bright guy, and Jeff Shingles, who was with Elliott Automation, I think, a competitor of sorts in the computer industry. And he came on board, and he turned out to be a real gem as well. So we're very lucky with our initial hires.
And I presume, were conducting the interviews for all these people because you were running the office, weren't you? So do you remember the Jeff Shingles interview? What was he like? He obviously they all had long careers, but he came to rise to a very senior position at DEC in the UK. What were your first impressions of Jeff? What was he like at that age, at young age?
Enthusiastic, go, and fascinated with the technology, and wanted to get with it. He was a natural hire. Yeah.
Do you remember what he looked like? He must have been quite. It's kind of interesting to picture him as a younger man. We see the older pictures. Do you remember how he looked at the
Yeah,
time?
I remember his face. I remember his posture. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Describe it, John.
Hard to describe, but you know, he was not laid back. He was into it. Yeah.
And the interviews, they take place. Were you interviewing in the office? Were you interviewing in the pub? We hear some interviews later in life might take place in the pub. How were you conducting your interviews?
Well, the initial ones, of course, were in the bingo hall with the bingo tables. Um, um, Later on, of course, we went to Arkwright Street. We had I don't know how many square feet space there, maybe as much as 10,000, because we're going to do some assembly work as well. We need offices and we needed assembly and support, and we needed classrooms for training people in software and so on. And
Do you
so that's where a lot of
do
the
you
later
think
interviews came. I can't remember how long we were in Castle Street. A year, maybe 2 years at the most. Yeah, we had to get more space. Yeah, we had to be able to move equipment in and out and so on. And Wilbur's is not the best location for moving computers up and down.
at what point did you move out? Was it a size issue, too many employees, or was it this need to move computers up and down that got you out of Castle Street?
Well, it's a combination of things. Uh, we had adequate space, but it wasn't worth spending the money and putting up classrooms and things like that on Castle Street, because it just wasn't going to be adequate. Uh, and so I think it was our right road that we rented this industrial building with offices in the front, 2 stories of offices, and lots of space in the back. And that served us for quite a number
Just
of years, certainly during my tenure there.
tell me a little bit about the bingo hall. Do you think people were slightly taken aback? New employees, customers must have been interesting to say the least to walk into this office space. There used to be a bingo hall above a church. What
Yes.
was the response of
Well,
people?
very interesting. Right? Uh, the Harwell people didn't need to come there. We went there, and they knew of me. They knew of the work at Chalk River, so and they knew the company. Um, but then I think there was a National Gas Turbine lab in Whetstone. I think was the next customer with a PDB-7, was a follow-on product from the PDB-4, and they wanted to check us out, see if we were for real. And so they came to the bingo hall, and and I guess they determined that maybe we were for real when they met a number of people, but it wasn't a very uh, auspicious accommodation, or I can't imagine it gave them a lot of the confidence. But anyway, uh, they liked the people, they liked our product, and they became a customer.
What was the bingo hall like? Was it a large open space? Was it well maintained or a bit shabby? Could you remember much about the bingo
It's a
hall?
large open space. There must have been, I don't know, maybe a dozen bingo tables with lino tops, red lino tops. I remember them being red. And yeah, uh, clean. And we had light, windows on the sides, um, plenty of lighting. So it wasn't too bad. And it was busy. Once we got a few people working there, it was busy and the phone was going and so on. So anyone came there, at least they felt the life of the company.
it seems to be a common thing amongst DEC to have open plan offices, doesn't it? I mean, you had it at Maynard, and later at DEC Park, it was an open plan. That kind of helped the working environment, this kind of open plan nature of its spaces.
Yes, we weren't big into offices. Um, you need conference rooms so you can have meetings and and be secluded and to talk to customers and so on. Um, uh, but there's not a great need of. It's only when you're doing engineering and design work and things like that where people need to uh, get secluded and have privacy and so on, think about their work and so on. But in sales and marketing, a much more open environment it works just as well.
Well, we hear often there's this talk of this thing called the DEC Way, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I wondered if you had any thoughts on what that meant and whether that was supported by this kind of open plan philosophy and culture.
Well, it's a frugal way, I suppose, and low cost. Um, we weren't out to impress people with furniture and accommodation. We were out to impress them with engineering and technology and the people that supported it.
What was the
So, so open space
what was
didn't matter. It got a little noisy at times.
what was Arkwright Road? That was your first big move, wasn't it? And also that's where CSS started up. Why did why did DEC choose to open CSS in the UK just very short period after the sales and marketing office? Because it's quite a leap, isn't it, from sales and marketing to now to engineering and construction.
Um, well, there's a lot of pressure from UK government uh, to manufacture in the UK. They could see that we were going to have a big influence on the existing computer industry there. And so I suppose their point was if you're going to be here, then be here in a bigger way and do manufacturing and do some engineering as well. And so that was the reason.
Did you speak to the government, or were you involved in those? Did they come and say to you, "You've got to do this," or was it more of a sense of? Did that come from within DEC itself?
Um, I don't remember um, much in the way of talking to government officials as such. Um, I think they were giving us the feedback through our customers as much as anything, because a lot of our customers were the government, the national labs and so on, and the universities even. So, but I don't remember uh, men in pinstripe suits and bowler hats or anything like that coming and telling us what we had to do.
But the feedback was if you were serious, you had to start making stuff in the country.
Yes, because each of these government customers had to justify why they were buying from us versus buying from Elliott Automation or from Ferranti and ICL, I suppose, later. And so it was that sort of pressure. And so we sort of went a bit at a time. And as the volume picked up and so on, as we were able to make it worthwhile doing, we did it. And a lot of that was done after I left. Um, manufacturing in Ireland, manufacturing in Scotland, and so on.
And so Arkwright? Tell me a little bit about Arkwright Road. How different is it to Castle Street? It was a bigger. What was the facility like?
Well, it was as I remember, was in an industrial estate, one of those standard industrial buildings with manufacturing space at the back and office space at the front. And I just have, general feeling. I can't remember what the general area was like anymore. I wasn't there long. Um, I was doing the European thing, and then can't remember what year it was, but 19, uh, 1980 maybe. I went back to the US.
I think it was 79. I think
It
was
could
that
have been
correct?
80.
68.
Uh,
So 68.
68, 1968. Yes, and of course, uh, I was not a US resident. I was a Canadian citizen and British subject as well. And so they had to make an application for me to get my green card to go to America because they wanted me to go to the West Coast and run the West Coast operations. It was referred to in
Yeah.
DEC as their foreign subsidiary in America. And they wanted someone that they could trust that made it work in Europe and go to California and make it work there. But it took a while. I was stuck back in Canada for a while with the occasional commute to San Francisco until I got my green card. They had to call Senator Ted Kennedy and say, "What can you do?" And he made a call to the consulate in Montreal. Next day I got a call, "Come in and get your green cards." So it wasn't what you know, it's who you knew.
It's definitely who you knew.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit before you went back to the United States. You came up with this. You're credited with coming up with this phrase, the mini computer, aren't you? And
Yes.
you quoted it. Was it a 1965 sales report? Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come about?
Well, when the PDP-5 was replaced with the PDP-8, I would my transportation at that time was in was it in Austin or Morris Mini Minor, I think, and I was having a lot of success with the PDP-8. I was selling almost as many in Europe as I was selling in America, and I used to send these monthly reports. I'd say you you have to, you phones are you've got to report to headquarters, you've got to tell them what's going on, sales reports and so on, potential customers, because they need forecasts, they need to plan production, one thing or another. And so I'd send these monthly reports, and I think I entitled them driving around in my mini miner, which in those days was the land of miniskirts, selling mini computers. So that caught on back at Maynard. They loved the reports. They loved the name mini computer. The press picked it up, and that was it. That whole industry became the mini computer industry.
Did you have any idea what you'd unleashed by creating this phrase? Did you think it would become so big, or was it just a?
Would what come so big?
Did you have any idea this phrase would stick? That it would become so?
No. Except we thought it was a good phrase. We used it. We had to position ourselves and products in the marketplace. We refer to them as mini computers, and yeah, so it was naturally caught on, and they love to get in these little stories from the UK. So it caught on back there, and of course the press got hold of it, and that was it. It was the mini computer industry.
How?
And DEC was a new computer company.
Why do you think the DEC minis were so successful in the PDP-8? What was it? Because there were competitors out there, weren't they? What was it DEC? How, either from a technology or from a pricing or any other perspectives? Why do you think they was doing so well?
Well, it was a natural fit in the labs where they wanted to get real-time information, the experiments and so on, with the nuclear labs or chemical, biological, whatever, and do local analysis, not have to go back to the computer center and punch cards and do all the analysis. So it was a natural fit, and of course the word got around of what we'd done at Chalk River, and what was happening in the US, got around Europe and in the labs. I mean, the scientific community knows what's going on everywhere pretty well. And so it was already a very receptive audience. And I flooded the market with these brochures in the PB8 and the letter and the phone calls started coming in, and on the visits, yeah, it took off.
And
The market was ripe for the picking.
and I think you then became more European focused, I think, didn't you?
Yes, my boss, Ted Johnson, had been running the Munich office, and he had a German manager reporting to him, and so when and someone had come across, trying to think of his name. Dad was a famous writer. I can't think of his name right now. To run France, and when Ted Johnson went back to the States, he put me in charge of Germany and France as well as the UK. So I was essentially running Europe. Yeah. John Fadiman was the manager in France. Clifton Fadiman's son, Clifton Fadiman was a well-known author back in those days in America. Yeah. John Fadiman. Yeah.
And I suppose a big question, especially for the people around in Reading, is what you're starting to move away. Is you have an interesting story, having been born in the UK and then moved around and gone to Canada, then come back. You've seen a lot of changes, and then you moved to the European role. Do you remember, in terms of Reading, at least, do you have any kind of memories of Reading? What it was like as a place at that time? Was it kind of was it was there a lot? Was it an energetic sort of place? Was it a busy kind of place? Was it a quiet market town? What are your memories of Reading at that time?
Well, it was a little bland. I mean, it had a third division football team. It had a brewery, and it had biscuits, and the university was, I think, well respected as an agricultural college. But it had a good railroad connections, east and west, north and south, and so on. But it was, that's basically what it was. Relatively bland, but not posh. You know, the surrounding communities like Pangbourne and Henley were posh, right? Well, Reading was more working class, more down to earth, and but it hit the sweet spot for us. It felt right. Great location, great communications.
How did it and how did it feel coming back, I suppose, to the UK, having moved back up to Canada for a year or so, then you're back? Did you see much change in the country at that point, or had you because you knew the area, had it changed much in your time away then coming back?
It hadn't changed a lot. No, no, it hadn't changed a lot. Uh, the motorway system was very slow to be built. Britain lagged everyone in Europe in building motorways, and but it was progressing, and it was getting there. And, um, and of course, it was a little more prosperous than when I left. We were still, I think we were still had rationing when I left in 1957, was it? Yes, 1957, I think. I left to go to Canada. I think we still had rationing, and if I wanted my Mars bars, I had to have these coupons to buy my Mars bars. Mm.
And what was it like bringing your family back here? Because of course you left as you went out with the Canadian girl and you came back with a family, didn't you? How was it kind of getting your family set up here? How did that kind of go?
Well, we had some setbacks. Um, um, it wasn't easy. Uh, the kids were getting into school, and not liking it particularly. So it was not an easy adjustment for the family. My wife at the time, we just had the one car. I had the Mini Minor, and uh, she would go shopping with the pram and the kids and so on the bus and so on. So it was kind of tough compared to life in Canada at that time. And um, so it was not an easy move from that point of view. Although, we had friends there, and we made very good friends. So we acclimatized pretty well.
And you said I think you were you moved out to Paintball eventually, didn't you? What was the accommodation
Yes.
like? Did it compare? How did it compare to accommodation flats, houses in Canada or the United States at that time?
Well, of course, everything in Britain was smaller, right? Um, in Canada and America, you talk about the number of square feet. In England, you talk about the number of rooms. Um, um, Everything was more compact. And what they come, we had a nice house in Bracknell we were renting, and in Pangbourne we bought a house, uh, lovely little house, and fairly modern. And the only problem, it was right by the railway station. And when I mean by the railway station, uh, you could talk to passengers on the platform from the garden. And and we had been at the essentially the end of the runway, Heathrow runway in Bracknell, got used to planes going over. And our first night in Pangbourne, it was a Sunday night, and the trains started coming back. I think there was 100,000 trains a year went through Pangbourne, mostly passenger, and and you'd hear this roar of a train, and we're all in one bed, the whole family. When we sit bolt upright in bed with this train came through, and we settled down again, and then 10 minutes later, another one would come through. Well, and so we went on. So we got double glazing on that house of all the windows pretty fast. We cut out the noise. Well, anyway, can't remember your question now.
That's interesting. Tell me a little bit about. We assume with DEC everything was brilliant and successful, and the growth curve was onwards and upwards. And any challenges in what were the challenges, or was there one particular challenge in setting up the national subsidiary, in opening the office? At any point, you mentioned you got kicked back from Bracknell. They didn't want to know because you were a foreign company. It took a long time to get a phone line, for example. Were there any hurdles that made it, I suppose, difficult? Any challenge, a particular challenge maybe that you had to overcome in opening the office or creating the DEC subsidiary in this country, do you think?
Not really. Um, um, we were able to get a phone fairly quickly and running, which was great. Um, Things went along pretty well. I think uh, I don't remember any barriers in the way, um, other than that we're a foreign company and so on. But the people we were selling to uh, wanted our product, so uh, it smoothed the path pretty well. Um, no, I was surprised. I think surprised at how reasonably well it went. Once we got into Reading and got a phone and so on, and administrative help.
What was I suppose, the competition like? Obviously, we know DEC very well for its successful mini computers and later the VAX systems and many other things. Was there a sense of competition? I mean, it's a small market. Growth the potential was huge, but did you run into the competition much? What was the competitive angle like for you in this country in terms of dealing with, I don't know, there's IBM, there's Elliott, aren't there? There are others.
Well, for the most part, we were positioned a little differently to the British competition. Um, we were aiming at the scientific market as much as anything, and the OEM market. You're familiar with the OEM terminology, and whereas the British computer industry was aimed more at well, at the high end, they were aimed at the scientific computing market. But for the most part, they were aimed at commercial data processing. And at that time, we just were not interested in that market. And apart from Ferranti and Elliott Automation, I think that was the extent of any competition that we faced in the scientific market. Apart from, and of course, American computer companies were interested as well, but they were a little slower to come over there.
What was the importance of the OEM market to you? I mean, that's an original equipment manufacturer. What was the importance of that market to you in those early days?
Well, it broadened the market for us. I mean, they were handling a segment often that we could not handle, because they were providing application software that we didn't have, or real-time instrumentation capability perhaps we didn't have, and so on. So it was added value that they had, and so that broadened the market, and it became an important component of the market.
How did it work? They would customize DEC systems. You would sell them equipment. They would customize it. How did the relationship work?
Well, our technical support was quite strong, and so we could show them how to, excuse me, how to interface to our computers and so on. And we provide the logic modules if they wanted to use those too, although they prove a little expensive compared to what they could do themselves. So most of the interface work those customers did. And of course they knew their end market. They knew what they were going after. And so we had a pretty close engineering relationship. And we train them pretty well. They do their own installations. We would provide backup support or maintenance if they needed it.
And I suppose the question for you is, what just you left again the UK in 6 to 8. I think you went back to the States, didn't you, or into Canada, then to the United States. Um, did you have any feelings on leaving? What was your kind of thought? You've created this national subsidiary. You're now leaving. What were your feelings upon going back to Canada at this point?
Well, we did it mostly for our kids because they were essentially Canadian. Even the one that was born in the UK, we had one born at Reading at home, our youngest. But he was a Canadian citizen born abroad. And so um, we felt that, and my wife was Canadian, of course, we felt that we should give them the opportunity back in Canada as children. And so that was the main reason we wanted to move back. And of course, I didn't end up in Canada. I ended up in California. But the kids adjusted faster than we did.
Do you have any? Did you have any emotional attachment to the UK? Did you, or just is it corporate politics? You move out and you fly on. Did you have any kind of feelings vested in
Well,
considering the work you've been
I,
through?
I had family there, and I still do. And I have a home there. I still do. And I have a lot of emotional attachment. And yeah, still have emotional attachment.
Well,
Yeah.
it must have been.
Unfortunately, I can't travel anymore. It's just too much of a trip for me to make. And once COVID came, that cut down my trips back to the UK.
Well, just describe, just final few questions really. I think, what was it like? Describe it, creating that company. I mean, you traveled. You must have traveled a lot. It sounds like you were traveling a lot.
I was, yes,
How
yes, I was on the road very well all the time. Yeah, yeah.
is that an exhausting time for you? Was it an exhausting era for you, or an energizing era? Would you say?
Oh, it was a piece of cake for me, but it must have been hard on my family. Because I was away a lot. Yes.
What was a typical trip for you? Do you think?
Um, well, of course, I go back to the US every couple of months or so. Uh, but once I got the European job, of course, I was crossing Europe a lot all the time. I mean, I don't know, it was every week, but um, I was back and forth a lot of the time.
Hmm.
A lot of traveling, yeah, all the time on the road. Because we were building organizations. And so you couldn't do that remotely. You have to be there. You have to take the pulse of the local situation. And we had good managers, and we trusted them, but you had to go there and feel it and be involved.
Looking back, what would you? How would you describe DEC UK? Is it possible to put it in a few words in terms of, I don't know, where it fitted in the DEC empire, or it's kind of like its importance in any way?
Well, I suppose it became the largest subsidiary. Canada was very important. Um, and Canada and the UK, I think, probably were the most successful and the biggest. Probably the UK was the biggest foreign subsidiary. Um, and it was a pretty important component of DEC's activities. And of course, it became the base for its expansion throughout Europe and Middle East and Africa, I suppose. I don't know how important they were, but every little bit counts.
What was the
But UK was very important for the European expansion.
What was the corporate view? What was Ken up? Did you get a sense of what Ken's view of what DEC UK was at the time, its value, or was there a view of the head office what UK's role was or its importance?
Um, Very important and a fun place to be. And we had no trouble in attracting people. They all wanted to come over and work. And Ken Senior is one of them that you know of. Bill Long came over. Jim Murphy came. And kind of they were lining up to come and work in the UK. Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
Well, because we were successful, and it was a fun place to be. And you know, they spoke English, which was a big advantage for most of us. And yeah, and of course, a lot of people have cultural ties in America to the UK and to Europe, of course.
So I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum. We are interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the UK. It's December the 5th, 2024, and we are online. I'm talking to John Leng. John, you had some interesting thoughts on the future of technology, and you set up Reading's office in 1964, which was a time of great technology innovation and change. Let's talk about the future. We've talked about 1964, but let's look a little into the future and hear your thoughts about what you think are interesting areas now that we should be paying attention. And you had some thoughts, I think, around AI and around supercomputing, didn't you? Maybe if we could start with maybe supercomputing. What do you think is interesting there at the moment?
Well, AI is very important and also of big concern. I suppose if I were over there now, I'd be selling NVIDIA chips and chat GPT software. And I guess the concern I have is that the chips and the AI chips have become so prolific that they'll be somewhat like brain implants, and that we'll all be exposed to them and potentially exposed to AI software without our control. So it's going to be a very interesting time. I can't remember the movie, but space exploration, and there was a HAL computer controlling their activities, and I think it might be well to think about that again and how AI will affect what we do in our lives.
Do you see the obviously AI is two things. You mentioned NVIDIA chips there. What do you think is do you have any thoughts on why NVIDIA is so interesting? Is it because of what they able to do with AI in general, or are there other aspects to NVIDIA that you find interesting?
Well, I'm not familiar with the technology as such in detail, but the chips nowadays are amazingly powerful, and the computing capability is amazing compared to what we had in our days. And And so it can operate in a real-time mode, um, and essentially think much faster than we can.
Interesting, your parallel there. Of course, DEC was very innovative, wasn't it? And you broke a lot of ground with computers that were able to operate in real time, what for them was considered
Yes.
real time. Just how different, in what ways are where we are now different to the kind of systems you were working on?
Well, the systems we were working on, we were trying to integrate computer technology with scientific and engineering experiments. And so we were particularly at Chalk River in Canada, the Chalk River Nuclear Laboratories, working very closely with DEC and getting real-time access capability into their computers. First with the PDB-1, and then later with the PDB-4. And the PDB-5, which became the PDB-8, was developed for us at Chalk River. So my colleague Colin Lennox, who was also from Harwell, needed it for data logging data from nuclear reactors. He was doing reactor control experiments, the first ones, using digital computers. The PDB-4 was in fact the first computer that we know of that was used to control a nuclear reactor. And the PDB-5, he was using it for data logging to free up space on the floor, and I used it for pulse side analysis for nuclear experiments. So we had a big influence on DEC, and of course the PDB-5 then became the PDB-8, and I had joined DEC and had suggested, I'd made some trips to Europe and suggested that DEC set up in Europe. So their motto in those days was, well, he who proposes does. So I did. And so I headed off to the UK and visited the various labs around Europe demonstrating the PDB-5. And so that was our start of activity in Europe.
So tell me, we were obviously talking here about the today and advances in NVIDIA's as a large player in AI because it provides chips that are capable of supporting AI. And you mentioned ChatGPT. I suppose, would you be able to, in some ways, quantify or explain to me how important DEC was back in that era? You mentioned the work there that they did for you at Chalk River. Is there a parallel? Can a parallel be made between the importance of NVIDIA today and the kind of role DEC might have been playing back then in terms of pushing the envelope on technology?
Well, we were working closely with scientific labs. Today, it's a consumer market for this technology. So we were a back order, really. Today, it affects all of us. And it's going to be very interesting, very exciting. But there are going to be some unknowns that we have to deal with.
I mean, how important was DEC in terms of it provided these mini computers that were incredibly powerful, incredibly usable, and obviously very affordable for so many people? How important was DEC in terms of pushing the envelope of what was possible back then? Today, the computers would obviously seem quite small and slow by comparison, but in that day, they were fast and powerful. So I guess the question is, how important? What was DEC's role in opening up the door, and what was possible for people like Chalk River?
Well, I think the fact that the DEC worked closely with the customers, and Chalk River was a DEC lab as their engineering department in Maynard, and we had very close relationship. We had the best engineers coming up, spending time with us. Gordon Bell, Ed DeCastro, Pat Green, people like that, and so we were as much as their engineering department as they were for us. So and the scientific community were very interested in what we were doing. So it just opened up the market around the world for DEC. Today it's very different, right? It's a consumer market, and but NVIDIA will be affecting all of our lives very quickly.
Explain to me what you mean by it's a consumer market. How is that different to the market DEC operates in, and how will NVIDIA, do you think, come to have such a huge influence in our lives?
Well, basically the technology today is interested in the communication between it and the brain. In those days, it was between it and some instrument and some experiment. Today, it's a human interaction, and we'll have as much as we're developing the technology is going to have a big impact on us. Hard to say how, but it will.
Do you think that, just go back again, parallel between then and today, you've kind of hinted a couple there at times at the risk of AI. Do you think there was any risk in the technology that in the scenarios where DEC was being used back then? Did people today talk about AI taking jobs, for example? Was there any of a similar discussion back then about DEC or computers in general, about putting people out of work, or were there other concerns around the arrival of computers?
Oh yes, but that's been going on for ages, right?
Mm.
From when we were rural communities to industrial communities. That's always been a discussion and a debate. The thing is that the technology has always improved productivity, and productivity creates wealth, and it also eliminates jobs, but it creates new jobs. So it seems to keep in balance. We're not run by machines and technology completely. We are running them. So man is still involved and still have plenty of work to do.
Do you think AI... Sorry, I was going to ask you, do you think AI changes that equation, that finally people might be out of work, or or things just carry on if we find new things to do?
Well, AI will improve productivity one way or another, whether it's productivity of knowledge, which always seems to benefit mankind, or productivity of production, which always seems to benefit mankind. So certainly it will be doing jobs that some of us have done, but it'll be creating new jobs. So yes, we have to be aware and have to be concerned, but we have to embrace it too.
And do you see any other risk aspect to AI that maybe that concern didn't used to exist for computers, the kind of computers DEC would have
Yes.
worked on back in the day?
Well, the political risk, it's the political commentary will be generated by AI on behalf of our opponents and competitors. And so it has already started. So we have to be aware of that. And fortunately, our intelligence agencies are very much aware of that and thinking of ways to combat that. And of course, by the same token, they're also using it to influence our adversaries. But it's going to be a very important technology in the intelligence community.
How did computers in the era of DEC influence the debate or influence things like intelligence or security? Did you ever get any insight there? Were they factors in the work that was undertaken? Or did they have any impact on geopolitics at the time?
Well, we were customers like GCHQ in the UK and NSA and CIA and Washington were big customers and very much involved. And we, as we expanded our operations in Europe, particularly in Finland, we had to be very careful that the technology didn't migrate across the Iron Curtain. And there was a lot of intensive effort on the part of the Russians to acquire the technology. So it was in the intelligence community and in the armaments community. It was very important.
Just at a high level, how were people like GCHQ and the CIA using DEC computers? Were they using them for data processing, or were they using them as part of devices, or any kind of general overview on how they would have been using DEC's computers?
Well, all of the above. Can't really talk about it. You know, one of the problems of the Official Secrets Act of the UK, they don't ever tell you when you can talk about things, even though they may be 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. You signed your life away.
Okay, let's talk about something a little less. Let's talk about something a little less politically sensitive. Supercomputers is something I think you were interested in as well. We talk about AI and ChatGPT, and I believe supercomputers are being worked on at Harwell, which is where you used to work in the UK. Do you have any thoughts on I suppose Harwell's work or on supercomputers at large?
Well, I'm not very conversant with the technology, but quantum computers are the new thing, and are going to have a big impact in the future. And the Rutherford Lab, of course, are one of the centers for the development of that. I'm not certain where they're at. I don't talk with them, so I'm not certain what's going on. One of my hobbies is astronomy, and in the summertime we live up in Flagstaff near the Lowell Observatory, and I have some friends there, and I've been bugging them to try and adopt quantum computing because I think it has great applications in astronomy, as it has in intelligence and communications. But it's very slow to take hold. IBM is doing some good work, and I had a little conversation with one of the developers of IBM, and they're doing some good work. Meta and so on. But I'm not certain I'm going to see any big application of it in my lifetime. But keep watching, and if you could get the Rutherford Lab to put a little exhibit in your museum and get people thinking about it, it's going to be very important.
Why do you think quantum computing will be important? Why is it so different to computing as we know it?
Well, there's certain things you can do with it, like pattern recognition and so on. And so for AI work, it will be particularly important.
And do you see do you see it becoming one of DEC's great advantages was its computers were powerful but also affordable for so many people. Quantum computing is still very few people, large universities and research organizations and companies, and obviously it's extremely expensive. What do you see? Do you see any potential for it in the future becoming more of a technology that more ordinary people and companies could perhaps get a hold of?
Well, the technology right now seems to depend on cryogenics, which tend to be expensive and bulky. Maybe at some point we can develop some quantum physical semiconductor chips. But until that happens, it's going to be expensive and not something that's going to be proliferated amongst the users, other than being able to have access directly to some installation at IBM or Meta or whoever.
Do you
That's my
think
thought anyway.
what kind of applications do you think it might have? Do you see any areas in life at the moment where quantum computing could have a role and benefit society or business in or whoever in some way?
Well, encoding and decoding information is one. So certainly the communications and intelligence services will be using it. In conjunction with AI, I think they're going to provide a very powerful combination. I'm not certain how, but I would imagine that the Rutherford Lab are doing both. That they will, as well as quantum, they'll be using AI software, because I think I think the ability to access and interpret enormous amounts of data is something that quantum computing will be able to do.
I suppose in a big picture, where do you see what do you see DEC systems from back in the day in a is there a kind of any connection in terms of certainly not technology, it's spiritual connection in what they're trying to achieve with quantum computing to what DEC was trying to achieve, what is, in terms of what its engineers, the kind of problems its engineers were trying to tackle back then?
Haven't really thought about that. I mean, there was a long history of computer hardware development, so it was a natural progression. We're in the early stages of quantum computing and AI, so it's like people like NVIDIA will provide one quantum leap in the improvement in the technology, and I'm not certain where the next one comes, but NVIDIA is the closest I've seen to what DEC was able to do, and I wish I'd bought some of their stock a few years ago. It's going to be very important.
What do you think, if this asks the question, I suppose, if you there's two parts to this question. One is, if you were to do it all over again, it's 1964, obviously quantum computing doesn't exist yet, and AI is a thing that happens on films. If it's 1964, we all know the history. What would you do differently in 1964 that you obviously you followed a certain course of action? Is there anything you would do differently? And then the second question is, if you were doing that role again, it's now 2024, and you were coming to the UK, you're with a technology firm, unspecified, you were coming here to set up an office for them. What areas would you be in? What kind of, you were in mini computers back then. I think I've got a sense of where you'd like to be, but I'd like to maybe hear about it. What areas would you, as an individual, be excited about getting into in the same way you were excited back in 1964?
Well, it's chip technology, and if I could be the NVIDIA salesman over there now, I'd be very happy and become very rich. There are going to be other, I'm not familiar with the competitors, but there are other technologies, other companies coming along into that space. And as digital found, we quickly found competitors, and there will be competitors for NVIDIA and ChatGPT. So I think it'd be good to start looking at those right now and see what actions they're taking. But clearly, I mean, that's where the future is, as I see it.
And I take it those would be the areas you as if you were a young executive again, if today, those would be the kind of technology areas you'd be interested in getting involved in.
Well, my background was in the physics side, right? So it was very natural for me to go visit all the physics labs in Europe, and they knew what we'd done in Chalk River, and they wanted to do the same. So it's I think the marketing of these technologies now are really quite different, because people, that the knowledge of the use of these technologies is broadly dispersed. So You don't have to go over there to Europe or anywhere else to talk about it. They know about it, and as long as it's economically feasible for them, they'll incorporate it. And so it's people are gonna sell to themselves. It's a completely different way of marketing nowadays.
How is it different? Is it just is it an easier sell? Is it a harder sell, do you think? Is it a more sophisticated sell that technology companies do?
Well, it's easier because it's done online. People exchange the information online, so they're aware. You don't have to go and tell them. They can tell you. So you just have to provide the distribution network, deal with the paperwork across the borders, and take their orders. It's a very different environment.
Obviously, you had to go out and visit people and get on the phone to people to make things happen, didn't you?
Yes, yes, and talk about the configurations that they needed for their particular jobs. I spent a lot of time in the labs, like the Clarendon lab in Oxford. They threatened to give me an MA because I spent so much time there hanging out. But it was an access point to other labs and to CERN. They were doing a lot of work at CERN in Europe. And so you find one good outlet, one good customer like John Mulvey at the Clarendon labs, and it opened up other doors elsewhere. And there were many other opportunities where he worked at CERN. So but nowadays, I'm not certain. People want you to come and talk about it. You can do it all online. They just need to be able to acquire the technology, and so you have to set up this.
If you were going to do it again, how would you say? How would you do? What would you do today then? If you were John Leng, you created DEC's UK business in 1964. You're John Leng. You're going out to work in the first time here in the modern world where we are today. Would there be? Would you go into the same role, do you think, or would you do something different? Do you think?
Well, you have to find a good distribution spot.
Mm.
Things so you'd be close to London Airport, as we were, and so you need some technical support people that can help with the training of people and so on. So it'll be in support of what's available on the network, and a few experts, and I think I think you do most of it online, but do it in their time zone, in real time. So Reading's a good spot. Do it again in Reading.
And you mentioned there how you would make sure you had at the start of the call. You mentioned, I think you said you would make sure you had more money. I think, didn't you?
I think that was my wife said that.
Okay,
Not mine.
sorry, I misremembered that. I do remember you famously started the Reading office without much budget. Would you make sure you had better funding this time to get an office going?
Oh, no, there really wasn't much of a problem budget-wise. I had a lot of support from DEC. It was my proposal to go there and set up, and they supported me. I'd done the same thing in Canada, and it had become quite successful. And so I had a lot of support. Once I set up there, I was dealing more with immigration paperwork for people that wanted to come over to help. There was a whole slew of people that wanted to come to England to help, and some of them did. And it was considered an exciting opportunity at DEC.
Do you think those opportunities, those the kind of opportunities still exist? I mean, DEC had a very open culture, didn't it? And it encouraged individual spirit. Do you think companies still
Right.
want that from employees, do you think?
Today,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with the culture inside semiconductor companies. I was in the early days. I sold PDB-10s, which were mainframes, to Wilfred Noyce at Intel. And with which he was able to design chips which replaced their mainframes. I'm not certain there's a need for that today in the same way.
Any kind of final thoughts on technologies maybe we should look out for? You've gone big on NVIDIA, you've gone big on AI and ChatGPT. You've discussed quantum computing. These are some of the three biggest subjects around today. Is there anything else you think we've missed here we need to be paying attention to for the future?
Well, inside information technology, I'm not certain. I think communications, I think, are in need of help, and I think quantum computing will be very important in communications, both from the point of view of security and in distance communicating in space. There's an interesting thing with quantum computing, a thing called entanglement, and where different quanta act as one device, irrespective of where they are in the universe. And the ability to be aware of each point in that device can exceed the speed of light by about 11,000 times. So there's potentially a new dimension in the universe that provides this communication capability. And how we exploit the entanglement capability in quanta could be very interesting. I would imagine that the Rutherford Lab will have that on their agenda.
Okay, fine. Two final questions for you, John. One is based on your years of experience and founding DEC here in the UK and being your work at DEC and other organisations. What's the kind of one piece of advice you might give a young technology company today that's maybe universal and maybe stood you in good stead?
What advice I would give them?
Yeah, one piece of
And what we
advice,
got,
if you had to give a tech company one piece of advice about how to succeed or what to avoid, um, or how to grow or how to conduct themselves based on your experience with DEC, what do you think that might be?
well, I think partnerships are very important. You know, individually, you can get to a place faster. But together with partners, you can get much further. And so partnerships are very important. And so, um, you know, at DEC, we had partnerships with our customers. And it you know, it dragged us along, but it moved us along very fast. And so I think that's very important. Partnerships for individuals and companies. Don't go it alone.
Okay, that's a great piece of advice. And the final one is a question for you, I suppose. Looking back on your long career, what would be, I mean, knowing what you know now, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give John Leng in 1964?
Oh, uh, I'm very happy with, with what I did and how it went. Um, I the, the only regret, I suppose, was at the end, um, where I was no longer with a company and I was trying to do a bit of consulting. And some people were very receptive, others weren't. It was uh, it's very hard to have influence as a consultant. Um, you need a budget. You need people. So I probably wouldn't try that again. When you're retired, retire. Enjoy a new life.